Okay, so we're going to start with a quick overview of what Final Cut Pro actually looks like and what the different bits of it are. This will hopefully be useful if you're a complete beginner. If you're not, feel free to skip over this video, and in the next video I'll talk about how I organize my footage. But this is essentially the timeline, and actually what I've got here is a video that I've just edited and uploaded, so let's get rid of that. And I'll show you what a blank screen looks like. So this is a blank slate on Final Cut Pro. It actually doesn't look too complicated. If you've ever tried opening something like After Effects, that looks super mega complicated when you open it initially. Whereas blank screen on Final Cut Pro, nothing loaded, nothing interesting going on. So essentially over here where my mouse is pointing, we've got the timeline. This is where our video is gonna show. This is our inspector, and this is where our files are gonna go. So basically files, video, inspector, and timeline. Very straightforward. And I'm gonna open a random library, so like this life advice one, and show you what a kind of full screen looks like once you've got everything set up. So here on this side, we've got this little panel which contains your libraries and your events, and we'll talk more about what those mean in a later video. Then we've got all of the files that we're using in this video here. And this bit is called a browser, and this is where we can browse through all of our files. And we have different ways that we can browse the files in our browser. So if we click on this button, it toggles between this view, which I find to be quite helpful because then you can see exactly what's going on. So I've got all my various bits of footage. I can scroll down, I can find my video feed, and you'll notice that as I click on something in the browser, that thing is then gonna appear in the viewer area. So, you know, pretty reasonable. And I've got all sorts of different types of media in this. So I've got like iPhone screen recordings, which again, show up over here. I've got the project itself. And again, we'll talk more about what projects actually mean in a later video, but essentially your project is your video. We've got bits of music. Obviously, if it's music, there's not gonna be any video available for it. We've got images, random images here and there. These are bits of B-roll that I'm putting into my timeline, and again I'll explain the process behind that and what that actually means in a later video. This is just to kind of give you an idea of what a timeline looks like. So sidebar over here that contains our library and our events, browser over here that contains all of our files, viewer over here, and this inspector bit will become relevant in just a second, but let's now talk about the timeline. And the timeline is, you know, the fundamental feature of any video editor. It is from start to finish what your video actually looks like. So this is what the timeline looks like. We've sort of got our main storyline, which is this big thing over here. What's the most valuable thing you... In fact, let's put it
Hey,
there.
I'm Tamor. I'm Ali's brother. I studied maths at university. I graduated a couple of years ago.
So this is sort of our main storyline. And then above it, we have got our various other bits and bobs. So for example, this thing, if I press V, I can toggle and untoggle it. V, I think, stands for visibility, so you can make it visible or invisible. So you'll see that this is this.
In Cambridge, and today I'm joined by my brother.
That sort of animation is called a lower third, and that'll be coming a lot more later in this class where I teach you how to set these up and how to use them. But the lower thirds go above our main timeline. Underneath our main storyline, we've got our music, and music is color-coded green.
Brother, do you want to introduce yourself?
And this is Soaking Up the Sun, a track that I got from Epidemic Sound, which is where I get all my music from. So that's essentially the anatomy of the timeline. We've got the storyline sort of as the main thing. We've got the music below it, and we've got other things that we want to go above it. And then finally, we're talking about the inspector. So if I click on anything in the timeline, it then lets me do stuff to it in the inspector. And in the inspector is where you can change settings like how big it is, its positioning, its volume, stuff like that. So if I take just a standard shot from the main storyline and we look into the inspector, we'll see there's a video bit, show the video inspector, which has blend mode, opacity, position, scale. So if I wanted to, I could scale this and that would zoom in to my nose and my face, which I don't really want. And then I can hit this button to reset, and that just resets it to 100%, which is absolutely fine. We can crop. So if I wanted to, I could crop left, right, up, down, whatever. And then we can distort. So if I wanted to, you could distort like this. I don't really use this very often, but I'll show you later on a use case where I actually do find the distort tool to be quite helpful. So that's the video inspector. Then we go along and then we have the color inspector. And in the color inspector, we can do our changes to color grading and color correction. Again, more on that later, but you know, if you just have a play around, you'll see it changes stuff. And once I've made a change, I'm just using Command Z, of course, to undo them. So, you know, various things that you can do in the color inspector, more on that later. Then we have the audio inspector. The audio inspector is where we can edit our volume settings. We can add equalization. We can add audio effects. Again, more on that later. Then we've got this eye panel that I literally never use. I think this is more for if you're sort of in a big film production, you want to label your camera, stuff like that. And we've got this, which is again the meta stuff. Again, I never ever use that. So the only things I use are video, color, and audio, and that's basically all you need to use if you're being a YouTuber, you know, a box standard YouTuber. So this is the anatomy of Final Cut Pro. A few more things. Over here on the sidebar, you'll see we've got this show or hide the library sidebar. So at the moment, we can click on that to toggle the library sidebar. We've also got the photos and audio sidebar. And over here, we can add sound effects, or we can add photos from a library, or sounds from iTunes. I don't really use this very often except to add sound effects. Again, more on this later. And then we've got the titles and generators sidebar. And this is very important because over here, we can add all these fancy elements like title scenes. We can add lower thirds. For example, this is a lower third, this is a lower third. We can get all these lower thirds off the internet, and then we can access them from this title and generator sidebar. And then if we want a lower third, we just take it and drag and drop it into our timeline, and then it appears. For example, oh, that would actually be quite a nice one. Follow us. Anyway, let's get rid of that. So yeah, I think that's everything we need to know. And in terms of anatomy of what Final Cut Pro actually looks like, let's now reset, go to a complete blank slate, and then I'll talk about how we import our footage. We'll talk about libraries and events, and we'll get started with editing this project. See you in the next video.